Karla Turner is her name. And she herself was an abductee. And she wrote a book all about it called Into the Fringe. And she and her husband actually were both abductees. And then after she came out with the book, a bunch of people came out of the woodwork. They communicated with her and started telling her their abduction stories. And they had experiences that would definitely suggest that there were military, some sort of government force who were literally working with aliens. So let's get into it.
Welcome to the Woo There It Is podcast.
So the first story is about Pat. When Pat was 11 years old, and this would have been in 1954, she had her first alien encounter. And interestingly, the following day, the military infiltrated her family farm in Floyd's Knob, Indiana. But before we get to that military part, Pat would literally, the next day, after all of this happened, forget about it. Forget about the whole thing. And it wasn't until 1986, so that would have been when she was 43 years old, she just suddenly remembered all of this happening. And when she remembered it, she was like, what the hell? Can you imagine just forgetting something like that had happened? But when she remembered it, she had two siblings who experienced the exact same thing. And so she reached out to them, and they had very similar memories to hers. But what happened that night in 1954 when she was 11 years old? So she said that one night, everybody in the family saw this bright orange ball of light outside the farmhouse. And somebody, she couldn't remember who, actually woke her up to tell her all about it. And she could hear her mom downstairs locking the door. And she remembered thinking, oh, that's not going to stop them, locking the door. And she also remembers thinking to herself, I'll just go back to sleep and they'll come and get me. So she had some sort of knowing about these creatures right away. So it would seem that this wasn't her first encounter with them. But the next thing she knew, she was waking up in her bedroom and she could see these very pretty colors that were just swirling around in her bedroom. And she got up to look out the window, and there was this gray alien just floating there. And when she looks at it, she said that she could just feel this knowing, this camaraderie with the creature. And it said to her, do not be afraid. You are the chosen child. We will not harm you. And she looks around and she sees these tall creatures come into her room. And she can actually see them down the hall floating her grandmother out of the house. And she can feel that her grandmother is totally terrified. And so she starts to feel scared as well. And that's when she said that she saw this sparkling white light come in through the ceiling. And the white light just coalesced into this figure, which essentially looked like this blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus. And Jesus said to her, do not be afraid, my child. These are mine. Then he says, I am the light of the world. And then disappears from where he came. And when he says, these are mine, he's talking about all of the aliens. So then she's floated out of the house towards this bright crystalline craft, which is just hovering above the ground. And she said there was this giant beam of light that was just emanating from it. And she had to pass through the light. And she thought it would burn her. But instead, she said that it cleansed her. And then she was sucked into the UFO. And once she's there, this tall white alien starts scraping skin from her inner forearm and parts of her fingernails and the bottoms of her feet. And he also takes some of her hair. And she asks him, what do you need those bits of me for? And he says, we are making a new you. And she's totally undeterred by that. So then she says, are you an angel? And he says, yes, but not like you have been taught. So then she's taken to another exam room where something interesting happens to her. Okay, everything's interesting, but this is just more interesting stuff. She said that she's fused with this silver light. Here's a quote from the book. "It was done from something over my body," she said, "up high in the room. He, the alien, fused me into my head with the silver light. It will keep me from violent harm. It let me be perfect in human form for a few seconds. It was a protective light. I get the idea that when the silver light goes into my other body, I will be made into the new me. In other words, the new me will come back to life with my soul in it." Okay, this is so freaky. We're going to get to more on that in a second. But finally, it came time for her to leave the ship, and she's crying because she doesn't want to leave them. So as a souvenir, they give her this green healer rock. And she'd actually seen them using that on her stepfather. He had a bum leg, and they were using that healer rock. And they said, "You can have this. It's not going to work for you, though." But they tell her that she's going to have to forget about everything that's happened to her. And she's like, "Why?" And they say, "Because there are those who will tamper with your mind." Ugh. Who? So the very next day after this happens, the military shows up. How do they know about all this? And this is in 1954. So, yeah. Or at least, okay, they're the military, or they're at least a bunch of very military looking people, and they claim they're the military. And it's this huge production. There's all these cars and vans and tons of men with guns and stuff. And some of them literally start combing through the entire property looking for, I don't know, artifacts. And by the way, this is totally illegal. It's private property. They have no right to be there, but I'm off of my libertarian soapbox. So they literally do this. They keep Pat, I'm going to get back on my libertarian soapbox. They keep her and her family in her house for 4 days straight. They won't even let them leave the house just to walk around the grounds. And then she's an 11-year-old girl. She says they gave her an injection, and it made her just kind of feel like she could talk about a lot of stuff. So I'm pretty sure they gave her truth serum, which is sodium pentothal, which 11-year-old girl, I'm sure she did not consent to that shit. And she tells them everything that she knows. And she said there was this gentleman, this dude named Mr. Donaldson. I think he was somewhat of a decorated army man. And he's the one who starts interrogating her, and she's telling him what she knows, but he keeps telling her that he thinks that she's lying to him. And she talks about how the white aliens were angels, and he asks her, "Well, how do you know this?" And she says, "Because they told me." And he says, "What else did they tell you?" And she said, "They told me a lot of things, but I can't remember now. Someday I will remember, but not now." And he says, "Why can't you remember now?" And she says, "Because they said it's not time to remember. And besides, you were coming here, and I can't tell you because it's a special thing. When I'm a lot older, I'll remember what they said and what's going to happen." Did they tell you what's going to happen? Yes, they did. They told me about the bad time on Earth. I'm not supposed to tell about that. And then they go at it hard, trying to gaslight her. They tell her that it was just a dream, that nothing actually happened. She's like, "It wasn't a dream. You can't tell me that." And they really tried to make her think that. And then after they leave the property, she has zero memory of the whole thing. Like nothing even happened until 1986. Okay, so remember that weird fusing incident that happened with the silver light? Well, years later, she would have another experience, which she believes explains what was going on there. She said that she remembers being in a large room with a gray alien, and the room was full of these boxes that were like coffins. And inside these coffins were human forms. And she knew that they were alive, and there was some misty stuff all over them. And she was pretty sure that the misty stuff was what was keeping them alive. She also was pretty sure that they were essentially waiting to come alive sometime in the future. And the Gray asked her if she wanted to see hers. And she's like, sure. She had no problem with there being some inanimate human that was basically hers in a coffin. And she then says, and I quote, "I knew this was connected to the 1954 visit because I remembered they told me they were making a new me. I felt this cocoon was the new me. I felt that they are waiting for the resurrection or reanimation. And we will all be able to see and talk with them here on Earth. If I were to die now, I believe that my other body will house my soul when Jesus says it's time, and I too will come back. If I live through all the destruction to come into the new world, I will still need my other body, as the one I have will die anyway." Very weird. Very weird. And Pat would end up having a lot of different experiences with the Greys, and one of them even included her grandson. So alien abduction often is hereditary. So if your mom was abducted, then you might also be abducted. But yeah, weirdly enough, a lot of her alien abductions, her memory of them was actually pretty pleasant. But she said in 1993, she had a disturbing incident. She said one morning she woke up and she felt pretty groggy, like she'd been drugged. And then two men entered into her room, and they were essentially military men. They carried her out into this military truck. And on the truck, she's like in and out of it for about 45 minutes is her memory. When they drive up to this hill, and it's this big green hill. And she's amazed because this door opens up into the hill, and they drive into the hill. The military truck is able to fit inside it, so it's a pretty big structure. So the military truck drives into the hobbit hole, and she sees this 3-foot creature who's dressed in a black cape. And she hears telepathically from that 3-foot creature, "I know you don't like me." And then Pat thinks in response, "No, I don't want to do this again, but they can't break me because they couldn't do it before." Before, she has no memory of before, but apparently there was a before. And she's taken to a table, and she's in this dirty, junky warehouse. And it's not anything like the nice, normal abductions she is used to. And the 3-foot being starts poking around her with something, and she can't see it. But she can see while it's poking, she can see the 3-foot being, and it has this lizard-like face and these greenish, grayish skin. And she's totally repulsed by the being. And then later on, she's returned to her bed, and the next day when she wakes up, her first thought is, what kind of aliens are involved with the government? What kind of government is involved with fucking aliens? My government. And for this book, Karla Turner, the author, would end up interviewing 8 total women, but I'm not going to go into all of their stories. And I skipped a lot of stuff. So Angie was born in 1966, and her first major alien abduction that she remembers was on the night of July 24th, 1988. So she would have been 22 years old at the time. And she said that she suddenly found herself outside and she's paralyzed. And she said that she was looking at these beings, and they looked frail and hairless and white. But she said they had these mesmerizing eyes, and the eyes were cat-like, and they would wiggle and change shape. And in her head, she thinks to herself, oh, this must be a dream. And then she hears telepathically from one of these beings that this is not a dream, and that she must go away with them for a little while. What about no butt face? But they take her anyway. and they give her an injection in her left forearm. And the next thing that she knows, it's the following morning, and she has 2 red dots where they had injected her. So if she thought it was a dream, that's some evidence that maybe it wasn't. And she said that this happened again and again for a couple nights after that, where she'd have these vague memories of encountering these beings and then find red marks in various places on her body. And then one night, she's totally conscious, totally awake, and 2 grays just show up inside her house. And they hypnotize her with their eyes, and it makes her feel totally... See, the thing is, I think if you ever see an alien, if you don't want them to control you, don't look into their eyes. That's all, I guess that's all I can recommend. However, when she looks into his eyes, it helps her to feel totally calm. So maybe that's a good thing? I don't really know. And then they float her out to the UFO, which is right outside. And she gets sucked into this craft, this UFO, through this long tunnel of electric orange light. And then she's sat on this chair, this black chair, and this handsome young man with blonde hair, he's wearing this tan jumpsuit. She says that he scans her visually, so he just like looks her up and down. And as he's doing this, she has a very nice experience. She basically has an orgasm, y'all. It's inappropriate, sorry. This podcast is not for children. Why is that necessary for him to give her that? I don't know, but there seems to be a common theme of certain sexual things happening during alien abductions. I don't get why. And she asks him if he is an alien, and he says, "Yep, I am." And then 4 grays come into the room, and the grays hand him this green glowing ball. And he takes it over to Angie's stomach, and he starts kind of rolling it around her stomach. And it feels warm against her stomach, and she kind of feels this tugging sensation coming from it. And she asks, like, "What are you doing to me?" And he says that she's ripe enough and will be able to conceive soon. And so then she tells him that her husband and her, "I'm married, honey. I've had difficulty conceiving." And that's when this blonde man tells her, "Well, that's because your blood, immune, and genetic systems operate differently." So she asks, "Am I part alien?" And that's when one of the grays tells her that she has been altered a little to fulfill a special purpose. What the fuck? And the blonde man said that they had produced a novel breed from ova that they'd taken from her. He told her that she was a chosen one. Here we are with being told that you're a chosen one again. That's interesting. And she said he told her that her kids and other chosen ones would conquer the world through mastering the power of something that will only be made clear to her during future abduction encounters. And then, of course, the next thing that she knows, she's back in bed the next day. Very weird to be told that you're a chosen one. What does that mean? Okay, but only after that, she then starts noticing a lot of helicopters flying in the sky above her, which say Air Force on them. And they're frequently flying over her property. And she said that in one case, literally a dude lands in a helicopter, and he claims that he's from the utility company. Who sends a helicopter from a utility company? And that he needs to check one of her transformers. And I think he does, but she's like, "You're full of shit." He claimed that there had been some blackouts, but nothing of the sort had happened. So this is very weird. But let's go back to her abductions. So another one of them happens, and she said during it, this gray alien handed her this black box, and he told her to open it. And she said that as soon as she did, her mind just exploded with all of these images and patterns that just filled her mind. And maybe they were messages for a future date, things that she was going to remember sometime in the future. But once again, she's told that she's a chosen one and that soon she would have contact with other chosen ones and would be able to influence their minds. What do you mean influence their minds? This is not sounding ethical to me. Now it doesn't sound ethical. But part of me has to wonder, is this whole thing where they're telling Angie and Pat that they're chosen ones, they're special, is that some strategy that they're using to keep them complacent and controlled? There's no cut and dry way to interpret a lot of these alien abductions. And that's actually one of the points that Karla Turner, the author, would make later on. But so after Angie has had these sort of seemingly normal abduction experiences, she then has a very different type of abduction experience. And once again, she finds herself, this is terrifying, she's outside of her house and she's standing there with this thin blue alien and he scans her mind. And she said then 5 men approach her and they're human men. So this is the first time there's been humans that have been involved in these situations with her. And she said that 4 of these men were in olive green uniforms and they had crew cuts. But she said the 5th man, he was more humanoid than human. And she said that this humanoid man went over and he touches the alien, at which point the alien shrinks into this marble-sized ball of light, basically an orb. And the humanoid takes the orb and he puts it in his pocket. And this humanoid man said to Angie that these non-physical forms of energy were created and controlled by his group. And Angie asks him if his group created humans. I don't know why she asked him this, but she asked him, well, did your group also create humans? And he said, yep. Oh. He told her that his group, which she couldn't totally remember, but she thinks he called them High Shelf, his group operated in special underground stations. And he told her that she and other chosen ones were part of a mind control project to carry instructions and temperance via thought transference to other people. And then during a later abduction scenario, she said that she ran into the same blonde humanoid man, and he tells her his plan again, that she needs to send thoughts to other humans. And he says that the purpose of this is to remove filth and evil and negativity from humans. Okay, well, that actually sounds good, although something about this is off. Then she has a couple of more disturbing experiences. So in one of them, she finds herself in the middle of the woods and she's with a few other women and all of them are terrified. So she knows she's in the middle of the woods and she knows she's terrified and she doesn't even remember why. And then suddenly one of the women says, "Here they come." And some of them just scatter into the woods and she is just paralyzed with fear. And so she just stays there. And these men in military garb again come out of the woods and capture her. And they take her to a military base, this huge military base. And she's taken into one of the buildings where she sees these people sitting at a conference table. And she says that one of them looks like a highly decorated officer, like maybe a general. And he looks at her and he sends, like just with his eyes, he sends her a telepathic message. But she doesn't know what it is. She doesn't remember. And the next day she wakes up at home. And then she has an even more terrifying experience, another abduction event, where once again she's taken from her house by military men. And they go to some military base somewhere. Looks kind of official. And this other truck drives up and they take out of the truck this other man, this gentleman who looks highly distraught. And they put him down on his knees and they shoot him in the back dead. He just drops dead. And she sees the whole thing. They do it right in front of her on purpose. Because she says, "Why did you do that?" And he says, one of the military men tells her, "Because you talked." So at this very time, while she's having these experiences, she's also telling Karla Turner, the author of this book, what's been going on with her. And this guy tells her that every time a recruit, that's what she is apparently, I didn't ask to be recruited, thank you very much. Every time a recruit talked, they would murder another dude. But Angie thinks about it and she ends up talking anyway. I'll tell you more about that later. So during another abduction experience, she's taken to this room and there's this table in the middle and there's a medical woman there, maybe a doctor. And the medical woman tells Angie, "Oh, the other women call this the table of screams because women tend to freak out when they see the probes that are about to be used on them." I'm like, why? You're disgusting. Like, what is wrong with these people? So it sounds like this is more torture than genetic experimentation. But Angie passes out. She doesn't remember anything that happened after that. But the next thing she knows, the medical woman is holding some sort of device next to her face. And the medical woman says, "It's been deprogrammed. We've never had that sort of thing happen before." And Angie says, "Well, does this have anything to do with the implant in my head?" So apparently Angie somehow knows about implants in her head. And the woman said, "Well, there's a few of them in your head. 2 of them are from the aliens and 1 of them's from us." Why is everybody fucking with Angie's head? Good God. And Angie would find out later that her alien implants had actually deprogrammed the implants from the military. But Angie asks the woman, like, "Why are you putting these in my head to begin with?" And oh my gosh, this is so fucked up. So the medical woman tells her, "There's some things that the aliens do with the implants that we can't figure out." And she said, "And the aliens won't give us all their knowledge." Yeah, no shit, because you treat people like animals with it. But the doctor told Angie that at least one of the implants was to monitor when people come into contact with aliens and also to see the approximate location of the pickup. Okay, so that might actually explain how sometimes with a lot of these alien stories, the military arrives so quickly after it happens, almost as if they knew beforehand. It's very odd to me. So Angie is taken to this other location where she and a few other women are being interrogated by this major. And he wants them to tell him everything they know about the Greys. And Angie plays dumb. She actually acts like kind of a smartass because she doesn't want to tell him anything, understandably. But after that, they take her to that probing room, the table of screams. And she doesn't remember anything that happened after that. Ugh. But at this point, she's had a shit ton of experiences with the human military and her alien buddies, like she hasn't talked to them at all. And so she's starting to feel somewhat abandoned by them. And she's also noticed that she's had this spiritual growth happen to her as a result, what she believes is a result of her alien abductions. But now she's kind of starting to rethink it. She's wondering if it really came from the aliens or if it's kind of been her own thing. It's something that she's accomplished or achieved on her own. But not long after that, possibly because of what she's feeling, she's taken into a UFO with one of her normal alien friends, a Grey. And the Grey actually reactivates the alien implant that the humans had tampered with. And she asks him, "What is this all about?" And he tells her, "Oh, you'll know in due time." I'm like, "Tell me now." And then she tells the Grey about the dude who was shot in front of her. And the Grey tells her that military people can be untruthful. Some of their demonstrations are illusions. So maybe that guy was just an actor and they didn't actually shoot him dead. They just made it look like that. So after he says that, she realizes I think I'm going to still follow my heart and talk to Karla Turner and tell her more about my experiences so they can be shared. But the weird thing, so she thinks she's talking with her alien friends, these are gray. But the weird thing is that when she's leaving the room from him, she can see that she's on a military hangar. So what's the deal with that? And again, it's totally ambiguous. We may never know. Now we're going to talk about Jane. Jane didn't even realize that she'd been an abductee until 1992. And she would have been 49 years old. So that's like me finding out that I'm an abductee 4 years from now. But interestingly, Jane had developed or had demonstrated pretty good psychic abilities. And this was actually tested by a research foundation in San Antonio. But she would end up having her first UFO sighting on August 12th, 1992. And she and her mom went out to watch the Perseid meteor shower. And they got up at 4 a.m. to see it. And they didn't really see much in the way of meteors, but they did see a very giant white orb floating in the sky. And then there was another orb. And so they were watching these two orbs just dance around, and there really wasn't any other explanation. These were UFOs. But after that, she said, after that experience, she said that she started to feel like she was being watched. So she's 49 years old. She hadn't had that feeling before. She's not a paranoid person, but she could just sense it. And she even started carrying a gun with her. But because she'd had this experience, she started researching more about UFOs, and she started to realize that she had a lot in common with abductees. Things like they'll wake up with their clothes on backwards. That's not just something that happens to most people. Or they would wake up with strange marks, like something that looks like needle marks or scoop marks in their body somewhere, scratches on their body. Again, not really normal. I don't wake up with that shit. The biggest smoking gun for me is they would experience missing time. Now that's a really weird one. And one of her missing time episodes happened when she was leaving around 7 p.m. to go visit a friend at 7:15. So she leaves at 7, and on her way, she said that an owl just came flying directly to her windshield. And she thought it was going to crash into the glass, but it just curved smoothly over the top of the car without contact. Okay, here's the thing, y'all. When I read that, I just about freaked out because I've had something very similar to that happening to me like a couple months ago. I was driving down this particular road, and nothing like this has ever happened to me before, where I saw something big and gray come right at the car, and then it should have hit me, but then it somehow flew over and there was no contact. And it happened so quickly that I never really saw what this giant gray thing was. If you told me that I had to choose an animal from the list of all the animals that exist on Earth, I would probably have said it was an owl. So that's very bizarre. And then literally within weeks of that happening, I was going down the exact same way on the exact same road when this wire that was hanging down very low to the road, I didn't know it was there until I was right on it. And so I just drove. I was hoping to just drive under the wire. And I'm assuming it's like one of the telephone wires. I didn't really know because I just drove through it, and it ripped off one of my bars that I have. I have like a rack on top of my car, and it ripped off the front bar. And I didn't know that until I got home. And I didn't stop there because it's kind of a busy road and it's narrow. And if I'd stopped, there were cars right behind me, and so I didn't want to cause an accident. What's strange is that I called Duke Energy and I told them I think there's a pretty significant safety hazard. I never got any confirmation from Duke Energy that there was a wire that was down. It was very odd. It's almost as though the owl was a portent to something more significant happening later on. I don't know. And that's actually a subject of the next podcast episode I'm going to do about Chris Bledsoe. So more on that later. But yeah, she had the same thing happen, and it coincided with her having missing time. And I got to be honest, if I had missing time as a result of this, I don't think I would have even noticed. I just went home, kept driving. It was dark already outside. Kept driving, went home, went to bed. I didn't really pay attention to what time it was when I was driving. Yeah, so when she finally arrived to meet her friend, she was almost an hour late. And for a 15-minute drive, that's kind of not possible to happen. That doesn't happen. So it kind of freaked her out, as it should. But she started receiving communications. She started just having, I guess, what we would call a knowing. And at 3 p.m. on December the 1st, 1992, she just was like, oh, she knew that if she got all of her photo equipment ready, there would be a UFO that night that she could snap a photo of. And that's just what happened. She went outside and she was able to get a picture of a UFO. And all that stuff is strange enough. But the other weird thing is that she started noticing a bunch of helicopters buzzing her house. And here's what's odd. She told her local MUFON group. MUFON means Mutual UFO Network. It's a group of people across the United States who study UFOs. She told them about it. And then after that, she said it stopped happening. Like helicopters stopped. But she said that she started noticing planes flying over. But what's weird is that she said some of them were invisible. And I'm like, well, then how do you know there's a plane there? Maybe she just heard it. I don't know. And this next detail is going to factor in later on, but she would consistently have sort of psychic messages, future prophecy messages given to her of impending disasters, horrible things that are going to happen to mankind. And again, this was true with Polly. It seems to happen a lot with a lot of abductees. But let's remember, this was in the 1990s, so when's it going to happen? It doesn't, I mean, lots of disasters have happened, to be fair, but they seem to be talking about something apocalyptic. But one of my favorite telepathic communications that she had, and this is why I included the story of Jane in this episode, is that one of the things she was told was that the power-hungry governments of the earth were going to be very surprised because their worst nightmare was about to come true. Even they hadn't fully estimated the effect the aliens' arrival would have on the worldwide human population. And governments wouldn't have suspected, wouldn't have been able to fully estimate the rapid growth of the influence of the aliens. She was told that the government still hadn't fully accepted that it was a losing battle, and eventually the governments would have to acquiesce. Okay, I mean, as somebody has less and less trust in the US government and many governments around the world, this sounds like a good thing, but we'll see how it's ambiguous. So now let's talk about Amy. Karla Turner, the author, sort of designed the book so that more and more came out about alien government interaction as the book goes on. So each abductee's story gets more and more interesting. And Amy's story, to me, Amy is the more compelling, I would say, is the most compelling of them all. So Amy, just like a lot of abductees, was trying not to take her experiences seriously. She really didn't want to believe that they had happened, because who wants to believe that horrible stuff is happening to you? But after she read Karla's first book, Into the Fringe, she started to feel this weird compulsion to talk to Karla. And she just ignored it. She went about her normal life. But the tugging, it was like this really powerful need to reach out to Karla with her story. And so finally she just succumbed and she wrote a letter to Karla. So Amy told Karla about her abduction experiences. She said during one of her more prominent experiences, she was in a house and she was being examined by aliens. And she seemingly in a house, but aliens can put screen memories so that you remember things not exactly as they are. And she saw a group of human men and one woman who she knew was not human. She was some sort of alien, but that alien woman was wearing a mask so as not to freak her out. And the female alien puts her face really close to Amy's, which is kind of this common theme in a lot of abduction scenarios. I guess aliens are close talkers. But the female alien then tells Amy some things which really got Karla Turner's attention. She told Amy that her race had been doing things to humans that they should not be doing. She and several groups of her race wanted to stop the abuse of the humans by her race. They were working with certain people on Earth to stop the process. The other humans were ex-pilots, military officials, and other professionals. That's interesting. So this really caught Turner's attention because very recently she'd heard from totally two disparate sources. Only recently had she heard this. The same kind of story, that there might actually be a group of human beings who are working with good aliens, for lack of a better way of describing them, to defend human beings against abduction. And Karla Turner says that before these two people came forward with their information, she'd never heard of anything of the sort. So far, all she knew was that there were these abduction experiences, and also there seemed to be some really shitty humans also involved in abductions. But she'd never heard of anyone working against the bad guys. And then now she receives a letter from Amy saying exactly the same thing, which is a synchronicity. But let's hear more about what Amy heard from the masked female alien. So the female alien transmitted a bunch of messages to Amy about things that Amy was supposed to do. I don't like that. But Amy couldn't remember any of it. And then the masked alien she pulls this flat, small, circular, reddish implant from Amy's ear. And for some reason, and Amy doesn't know why, the alien really wanted Amy to remember that implant. And then she pulled out different implants from Amy's neck. I mean, Amy's just like this human pincushion just stuffed with all these implants. And this implant was cylindrical and it had these fine wires that were sticking out. And the alien told Amy that when that was activated, it controlled the muscles of the body. If that's true, they're literally controlling people. What a bunch of turkeys. And then later on, Amy undergoes hypnosis, regression hypnosis, and she remembers a lot more detail about these implants and how they can literally just control people like puppets and even kill them if they want. But now let's talk about what life was like for Amy as an abductee. And some of it sounds kind of exciting. She said that even as a kid, she would receive communications about future events. And for example, she was told that her mother was about to die, and that actually ended up happening. And she said that the way that she receives communication from the aliens is it's not normal communication. She said that usually she senses this dialogue of symbols, images, and concepts. She said, "When I listen, I forget how to speak. Words cease to exist, and I forget what using vocal cords feels like. I call it the language without words. No trance states." That sounds nice. And they're also giving her a sort of education, but not about fucking boring ass chemistry and math. She said she's receiving this when she's dreaming. And she can remember this woman teaching her things like levitation and telekinesis, which is like being able to control things with your mind, control objects with your mind. and also how to move through solid objects like you're an X-Man. And she said that one time when she was in the shower, she accidentally levitated a bottle of shampoo towards her. And it freaked her out. She couldn't believe that she was actually doing it. I would love to have that ability. But the scary thing for her is that she has this knowing that she's supposed to do something. She has a purpose, but she doesn't know what that is. And she kind of feels like she's not totally in control of herself. Like when the time comes, she'll just move and do certain things that she's supposed to be doing. And she's terrified about that, which I don't blame her. Even though she didn't remember a lot of her abduction experiences until she was older, she looks back and she realizes enough freaky things have happened to me that I should probably look into that. And so she does a regression hypnosis. And during that, she has a bunch of memories of her being sucked onto UFOs. And the things that she's told by the Greys are pretty intriguing. So in one instance, she said that she was told by them, for whatever reason, they wanted to make her stop being a Catholic. And they said to her, churches are not God. Statues and pictures are not God. Priests and nuns are not God. And I'm like, yeah, sure. I mean, I thought we all knew that. Maybe this is like, do Catholics think those things are God? I don't know. But then they tell her nobody sins, which I'm like, whoa, that's counter to the popular narrative. And they tell her to look beyond the pictures. They say it's all lies. And then they say that Jesus was something like a soldier, and he was supposed to lead the people in some sort of direction. And I don't know. It's unclear in the book whether that's being totally sacrilegious. I mean, to me, I'm like, I guess you could kind of say that Jesus was the type of soldier leading people. I mean, that kind of makes sense. So that to me didn't seem too heretical. But later on, and that's all they had to say about religion. More to me, I think, about Catholicism. But later on, during one of her regression sessions, she said that she was in communication with a Grey, and she felt this strong kinship with this particular Grey, like he's her twin or something. And he tells her this. He said, in the next decade, people will be expected to think the same. They're being taught to think the same like them, make them easier. And later on, Amy said that in the coming decade, the aliens doing the abductions would also promote a program in which people will be taught to think the same. The sad part was that everyone will think it's normal and it's their idea. Even being an individual will seem real, but not in actuality. He said that he and other aliens are trying to stop that process, and it's been going on for a long time already. I mean, schools definitely teach us all to conform in certain ways. They teach us to get certain degrees. We all learn the same cookie cutter stuff, and then we go to our cookie cutter jobs. So maybe that's what he was talking about. But she said that during another one of her abduction experiences, that she was told that humans, and this is a very different message, but she was told that humans are essentially spirits seeking challenging experiences. Our true nature is to seek every opportunity to grow and learn. Even sadness, sorrow, pain, and misery represent opportunities to experience and learn. And she said that she understood that the meaning of life was just to experience. That's all. Experience. And I've heard that before, and I think that's kind of nice, actually. Maybe that is all it is. But let's get back to good aliens versus bad aliens. Ultimately, Amy would find that she wasn't sure which aliens she could trust. And this is unsettling to her, but ultimately Amy decided that the only thing that she could trust was God. And I thought that was an interesting lesson. So let's say all of this is true, and I'm kind of increasingly thinking that it might be. Getting to the bottom of who has your best interest in mind seems really impossible, because it's totally so many of these experiences are thoroughly ambiguous. But if you go back to just having faith in the benevolence of the universe or God or source or whatever you want to call it, then that's pretty much all you need. That's all you can do, really. So you might as well just rest on that, because they have a lot of power and control over everything else, but they can't control God. All right, so finally, the author, Karla Turner, decides to share what's happened to her since she wrote Into the Fringe. And I love this. So after she had published her book, so she said that she and her husband knew they were both having experiences, a lot of weird experiences after she published her book, but it's very vague. Like they only have like, some vague memories of maybe dreams and then like weird markings that show up on their bodies later on. And this is confusing and frustrating, obviously. So Karla essentially says a prayer in her mind, and she prays for this. She said, "I had also been praying in my fashion to whatever good and loving and true higher forces may be out there, asking for two things: that they guide me to know and follow the power of goodness, and that they communicate with me in an overt manner without subtlety or ambiguity. I prayed for help, for information that would be clear enough for a child to understand, as I realized my level of understanding and perception were about that rudimentary in dealing with the aliens. I wanted a communication that couldn't be dismissed, variously interpreted, or ambiguous as to its nature." So she made that prayer, and then she said, this is what happened on the night of May 10th, 1993. So she believed that she received at least a partial response to this prayer, and it came in the form of a dream. So in the dream, she was facing this stage and essentially watching a play. And she said that the scene that was being acted out was from Genesis in the Bible. It was the scene when the older brother, Esau, returns home, and he's feeling so hungry he thinks he might die of hunger. And Jacob is sitting there with a bowl of food. And Jacob tells Esau that if Esau gives him Esau's birthright, is the oldest son of Isaac, their dad, then Jacob will give him some food, because Jacob is a dick. And Esau, he thinks to himself, well, I'm going to die anyway, so what use is my birthright? So he agrees to give Jacob his birthright. And then, that happens. This is all in the Bible. So then later on, Isaac, who's their dad, he's dying. He's old and he's dying, and he's also blind as a bat. And he calls Esau into the room, with him, because he wants to perform the laying on of hands to Esau to confer Esau his birthright, which is inheritance of Isaac's whatever land and property. Well, Jacob hears of this, and he puts on an animal skin on his forearm, and he goes into the room, and Isaac lays his hand on Jacob's forearm, which is covered with animal fur. And because Esau was super hairy, really, really fucking hairy, Isaac thinks that Jacob is Esau. And so Isaac confers Jacob the birthright instead of Esau. Okay, this is very weird. The whole story is weird. And I feel like when I was growing up, when I was taught the Bible, nobody ever said Jacob, later on went to hell for being a dick. It was almost as though, Jacob did the right thing, and it doesn't make any sense. Like, why did they sell the story that way? And so here's what the aliens say was the real meaning of that passage. So Karla said that she was taken through the play again and again, as you would do to a child, because that's what she asked for. And she said that each time the aliens would pause at certain places and explain the meaning behind the story. And ultimately what they would tell her is that this is what the aliens are doing to humans. She said that Esau represented the original human species, I guess because we were fucking hairy, on the planet. And she said that Jacob represented the altered product of alien genetic manipulation of that original species of human. They then told her that the bad aliens are trying to do this again to the human species so they can create a variant of human who is more useful for their purposes. So the bad aliens, she said the bad aliens would attempt this deception on the human race, just like Jacob managed to deceive and trick Isaac. She said that the aliens would deceive us by exploiting and manipulating global events. So that includes weather phenomena. She said that this weather phenomena was being used to make us believe that our planet was in imminent danger of cataclysm or destruction. And it's interesting because in a boatload of these abduction experiences that Karla was talking about, and in others that I've read about, this message of a coming cataclysm is very common. They're always saying that. And essentially, Karla is told that that's their strategy to freak us out. And they want us to be so afraid of this upcoming destruction that when they show themselves openly and offer to save us in some way, we will be willing to take their help, even if it means giving up our birthright, which is our preeminence on this planet, Earth. That's really interesting. Okay, because I've heard this a lot, this theory, but not as a bad, like I've heard channelers say something very similar to this. And I almost wonder if that's what, so one of the channelers, Daryl Anka, he channels an entity called Bashar, an alien. And Bashar has mentioned that it's very likely that we will have human alien contact the end of 2026 or early 2027. But he never says, because we want to come and abduct you and take your birthright, take over the earth. He doesn't say that. But it kind of sounds like maybe that's the plan. Don't quote me on this, but there's another psychic person who's also a comedian named Jessa Reed, who I'm pretty sure she said that her alien friends told her that at some point things were going to get really bad on the planet, but if we just raise up our arms and ask to be saved, then they'll come and take us away. And the way she says that, it's a great thing. And I would have thought that, oh, great, awesome, they'll save us. But maybe this is their plan, to supplant the human race, to essentially replace us and put their hybrids on the planet. And the aliens told Karla that all of this is a deception, and all of the destruction that might go on around us, and in many cases is actually caused by the aliens. And she said that we should not surrender our sovereignty to them or we would be lost forever. Ew, that's scary. But Karla said she brought up the confusing point that many abductees massively expand in their spiritual consciousness as a result of their alien encounters. And this is something that John Mack, the psychiatrist, the Harvard psychiatrist who did a bunch of regression hypnosis sessions with people claiming to be abductees. I talked about him in one of my first episodes. But John Mack, sort of because of this spiritual enlightenment that people seem to experience, he came to the conclusion that maybe the aliens are doing us good. Maybe they really do have our benefit in mind. And I thought that too. I agreed with that point. But Karla Turner makes a point that I think is counter to this. And also, I think I might now agree with her. She points out the fact that a lot of these abductees don't really seem to have any kind of spiritual awakening until they go through these regression hypnosis sessions and really fully consciously experience what happened to them, the horror of what happened to them. And she said if aliens were conferring some sort of spiritual benefit to these abductees, then why would they not just have the benefit before doing any kind of regression hypnosis? Instead, she points out that all sorts of survivors who survive any type of traumatic event, a lot of them actually do undergo spiritual growth as a result of it. Not all of them, but many of them do. She says it's as a result of sort of digging deep and rising to the occasion and realizing what they're capable of. One little PS to this story is that 2 years after this book was published, Karla Turner would succumb to breast cancer in 1996 at age 49. And there are definitely those who hypothesize that she was given breast cancer, if that's something they can do. And I don't see why not. They seem to be able to do a lot of stuff. And the weird thing is that this book went out of print for a while. I know that it came back into print in 2013, but when it came back into print, I don't know that there weren't edits. If certain things, details weren't edited out, it wouldn't surprise me if that happened. Although this book is pretty incriminating as is. By the way, if you have the original version of this book, feel free to send it along. Just my contact details are in the show notes. And with that, I leave you all to ponder. Thank you for checking out the Woo There It Is podcast. Until we meet again, this is Savannah Steele wishing you all peace, harmony, and joy.